Konnichiwa, and welcome to the Samurai Way, the podcast where we dive into the wisdom of the samurai, the art of Japanese living, and the philosophies that help us live with purpose and perseverance. I'm Lori Sagawa, and whether you're here to explore Bushido, the samurai, uncover the meaning of Ikigai, or just looking for a little extra gambaru, never give up spirit in your daily life, you're in the right place. So grab a cup of tea, get comfortable, and let's walk this path together. Are you ready? Let's begin. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Samurai Way podcast. And today I have the honor and privilege of introducing you to someone I met on LinkedIn, quite distinguished gentleman, John Yaworsky. So I will let him speak to you. I'll just give you a brief introduction. He is an award-winning producer with 25 years of traditional and new media production, with commercials, feature films, and working for some amazing people like Channel 4, BBC, NHK, German ZDF, and is consulted with other corporations, and has, what really impressed me, has produced and directed 90 online courses for John Hopkins and Georgetown universities. How many people can say that? And he now has his own company called Nimble Digital Media. And today he's going to speak about his experience, mostly about his experience in Japan and how that deeply affected his life. So please help me welcome John Yaworsky, and I'll let you share with the audience about, we'll start with your experience of Japan and how it affected your life.
Will do. Thank you, Lori. That's very nice. It's great to be here. Great to be speaking with you. I enjoyed speaking with you the first time, and I look forward to speaking with you here today. Yes, so I have a fine arts background. I've been working in film and video production and photography forever, since I was a little kid, but professionally for around 25 years or so. And about 15, 17 years ago, I was hired by a company in Japan to come over and tell the story of machinery manufacturing company called Ikigai. And we ended up interviewing someone who was described to me as the Japanese Henry Ford. He was a leading expert in manufacturing and machinery in that area. So I hadn't been to Japan before. My crew, I had two other people that I traveled with, and we went over there. And as I hinted, a day doesn't go by, and it's been 15, 17 years, a day doesn't go by that I don't think about something that I learned on that trip, or something that was just profoundly affecting me, both professionally and personally. Between kindness and respect and honor and some of those things, humbleness, it's resonated with me. I'd been to Europe. I think I've shot in virtually every state in the United States except Alaska and Hawaii. I've shot in France and South America, Wales. But my trip even though it was a relatively short trip, it was less than 3 weeks, there are aspects of it that it was just otherworldly to me. And it was just, our hosts were so gracious. It was so wonderful. And each night we went out to a more interesting restaurant. It was just one night after another of increasing interest and just a profound experience all the way around.
Well, did you have a problem communicating, or was there an interpreter?
So we had an interpreter who was great. And a funny little aside, the first day when we flew into Tokyo, and we were to go to Yokohama to start the production. And we were in a small van with 3 people from Ikigai and our 3 people. and the van had a flat tire. And our hosts were so embarrassed
Oh.
that they had a flat tire, and we were like, well, we'll change the flat tire, no problem. And there's no way they were going to let us change the flat tire. It's like, no way. So I think we ended up having almost a $500 cab ride to the location to start. So the very first, right from the start, it was just on another planet. We're a little jet lagged. We're without our guides. We're without an interpreter. We checked into a hotel that we didn't speak any Japanese. They didn't speak any English. It was complete sign language, whatever, and it worked perfectly. It was no problem at all. It was just wonderful. So we really never had an issue at all between when we had our translator, but even when we didn't, everybody was so polite and gracious that it just made everything was easy. We didn't feel like we were in some crazy foreign land. It was just workable, and we just so appreciated it. One of the things that was most interesting and probably sticks with me as much or more than anything else is, so we were there to videotape, to document this company, to do interviews and document this manufacturing company in multiple locations. So we started in Yokohama. We spent a fair amount of time in Tokyo and around Tokyo. But what we ended up doing day in, day out, sometimes 2 or 3 locations in a day, we'd be taken to a new location and we'd go into a conference room and we'd sit with our 3 hosts, and we'd sit there and we'd eat funny little sandwiches, and we'd talk among ourselves and they'd talk among themselves because there was no communication back and forth. But we'd eat our funny little sandwiches for 15-20 minutes. Then we'd exchange gifts, and we had a bunch of gifts. My client brought a bunch of really nice ties, so we exchanged gifts and we got some really cool gifts. Like just really interesting gifts and kimonos and blade guards from samurai swords, and everything was just so amazing. But then we'd say, like, okay, that's been long enough, time to go out to the floor and start shooting some videotape. So we'd go out, and we had like 12 cases of equipment, and all our cases were lined up in a row, perfectly placed, opened. And we'd take the equipment out of the cases and we'd set up our lights and set up our camera and set up our audio. And then when we were ready, after lighting, when we were ready to roll tape, just to get started, after we finished lighting, as we start walking back to the camera, we got a round of applause.
Wow.
Which, believe me, has never happened before or since for us. We were like, they watched us. They wanted to learn from us. They saw what we were doing. And then just to see how we lit, it'd take a half hour, 40 minutes to light a machine or light a situation, an arrangement, or whatever, just to get a round of applause. It was just fantastic. So then, of course, that just prompted us to do even a better job and to do a nicer job and do things a little, in some situations you would just pop a light up and be done with it. Well, then all of a sudden we're putting gels on lights and putting a couple extra accent lights and doing all sorts of things. So we'd shoot the videotape. This was long enough ago. We were shooting on videotape in those days, not memory cards. And then we'd put the equipment back in the cases. We wouldn't even close them. We'd be whisked away to the next location. We'd go into a conference room. We'd eat funny little sandwiches. We'd exchange gifts. We'd finish our sandwiches, and we'd go back out onto this factory floor, maybe a half-hour drive away from the previous one. And there were all our cases lined up exactly the way that they were lined up at the previous place. We hadn't even touched them. And the cases were open, and we repeated this. And this happened 2 or 3 times, mostly 2 times a day almost every day for like 3 weeks. The fact that picturing, it just the contrast of how an American, and I'm not disparaging American factories or anything like that, but the thought of a bunch of factory workers taking notes on how the cases were lined up and how to do it so nicely and how to have everything over and over again. Like I said at the beginning, I don't think a day goes by that I don't think of that situation. It was just the respect, the grace, um, and the accuracy, the attention to detail. There wasn't an aspect of the situation that wasn't fantastic at a level of just we were just in complete amazement for like 23 days, the whole trip.
Wow.
So anyway, that just that was just, and that was just the production. That's what we were getting paid to be there for. Um, then we had restaurants are going out for drinks and singing karaoke, and we did it was the whole experience. Went to some festivals, street festivals. Um, it, it was just fantastic.
It was, and everything you mentioned about respect and courtesy and honor and precision is really indicative of the samurai and the code that they live by: courage,
Exactly.
integrity, benevolence, respect, honesty, honor, and loyalty. And I believe that code of Bushido permeated the Japanese society. And it's still, in my opinion, it's still alive today, because if you go to Japan, or when you go to Japan, the streets are clean. There's no graffiti all over the place. People are so honest. They will not take extra money. They don't take tips at restaurants, and the way that they treat each other is just, and I experienced that somewhat in our family, and I just love it. That's what this program is about, and that's why I asked you, because it really struck a chord with me, how that just those 3 short weeks, how it impacted your life. And that's what I tell people. Japan is just like another world that may or may not
It's
exist many places anymore.
and it's all good.
Yes.
That's the thing. I mean, sometimes you go places, it's like, okay, well, it's different, but look out for this, or be careful of this, or this was all just eye-opening in such a positive, wonderful way. A
Yes.
couple other really brief anecdotes, just hearing how you described it. One of the things that also resonated with us, there's a famous intersection. I should know what the name of it was. I can't remember, but there's an intersection that has a very wide crosswalk, and hundreds of people cross when the lights change at any given time. Well, there's the thought of jaywalking or walking against the light is absolutely ridiculous. Nobody would ever
No,
do it.
you don't do that. Mm-mm.
You don't do that. So
Mm-mm.
that's something that we very much noticed. It's just like, no, we stand here patiently, wait for the light to change, and on, we all walk together. It
Yes.
was just like that. I don't think a city in the United States would that be the case. I mean, you'd see some people, but you'd also have the people trying to run across, or people on a cell phone or something. It'd just be just craziness. And then, as far as the safety aspect of it, we had another experience. We rode on the trains, and we did ride on the trains a few times that we were packed in like crazy. You had those guys that pack you on and whatever. Was totally reasonable. Didn't feel like it was an affront at all. It felt totally within reason and acceptable and understandable. Um, and my camera person, this was like the second or third day there. He left his camera case, his still camera case, on the rack on the train. It had he wasn't as much of a world traveler, and this is back in the day of traveler's checks. Hopefully people know what traveler. So he had his camera equipment, his traveler's checks, and all the numbers of his traveler's checks in
Ooh.
that case, sitting on the ledge, or on
Uh-huh.
the shelf on the train. And he didn't even realize till we got back to the hotel that he had left it. We're like, "Where's your camera case?" It's like, "Oh my God." It rode. We ended up calling, our client called with an interpreter and found out that there's a lost and found. It's like an hour and a half away at the end of the line. So my two friends got on the train and rode to the end of the line. Nobody had touched it. It was sitting in the lost and found, just sitting right there. So he went an hour and a half and got it, and took an hour and a half to come back. And in that amount of time, I was staying at the Ikigai Hotel, I'm sorry, the Daiichi Hotel,
Daiichi.
um, famous big amazing hotel. And I just sat for 3 hours by myself watching Japanese television. And I was seeing things. This was pre-Transformers and anime, and I didn't know anything about any of those things. And I was spellbound. So their misfortune, and actually it wasn't misfortune, it was just like a field trip for them to go ride the train to the end, pick up their camera case, and ride the train back while I was spellbound watching Japanese television.
What an adventure. And if you can imagine, would that happen in the United States?
It wouldn't have made it one stop.
Mm-mm.
The case might have ended up at the end, but it would have been empty.
Empty. So that's quite profound. And that happened to my husband and I, and especially me. I'd left a package when I went to the flea market, and all of a sudden I'd be down about 2 minutes. I go, "Well, where is it?" And so I go right back to the same little stand, or what you call booth, and it was there untouched. And that's how they are. It's just, you don't touch things that don't belong to you. You don't take things that don't belong to you.
Yeah, it would be unimaginable to
It
touch,
would.
to do something. And I just so respect and appreciate that. I try, it's like the kindness and the respect. I try, I was the executive producer of a company, an organization called Live Kindly, which is a vegan animal welfare sort of organizations. And I kept thinking about how Live Kindly, and my experience in Japan, was totally in sync. There's no, um, you know, except for the fact that a lot of the food in Japan is based on seafood. I had no problem at all being a vegan eating in Japan. It was wonderful. It was fantastic, and had no issue at all. And I would imagine now it's even easier. We did go to one restaurant that we were told we could get pizza, and this was the one time that a translation lost in translation a little bit. We went to a place that looked like an Ed DeBevick's, or kind of like a 50s sort of diner, and we ordered the pizza, and it wasn't a pizza, it was a souffle. And at that point, we were starting to miss a little bit of American food. After a few weeks, you kind of, I mean, I loved all the pickled ginger, all the various things, the
Uh-huh.
seaweed, and rolls and sushi and sashimi and all that. But the fact that we were, getting all excited about getting a pizza and then having a souffle sit down in front of us was so funny. It was just that was probably the one negative, and it wasn't even a big deal. But that was probably the only little hitch to the giddy up in our whole trip there.
Wow.
That we were excited to get a good old pizza.
I'm sure the pizzas have improved. They are.
I'm
They have.
sure they are. And we just, for whatever reason, we ended up at this place. Someone recommended this place. And so that's why we ended up. I'm sure we could have found a pizza someplace.
Mhm. When you're talking about honesty, John, I just remembered that of something I learned is that in the Japanese society, the first visit for a young child to go to the police station is when they find a coin. So when they find a coin on the street or wherever, they don't keep that and pocket it. They take it to the police station, and that is their first introduction to the policeman, saying that the policeman's your friend. And they don't have a lot to do in Japan, so they get to know all their people in their little vicinity, knock on doors and find out who lives where and what they're doing. And it's just, it's just so amazing. And one more story I would just like to share. My
Yeah.
grandmother was a proprietor of a hotel, and when we came, we were just very young. Our treat was to go down to the toy store. She would unlock the door and let us buy something. Now she could have unlocked the door, let us get something, and we leave. But no, she'd write a note. She'd put the money in an envelope, and it's like, that really spoke to me. That she could have done that, but they trusted her enough for her to have the key. And that was a good lesson about honesty for my maternal grandmother.
Yes. Well, I think honesty is certainly one of those the Bushido core values that it just
Mm-hmm.
makes so much sense. And I think I mean, there's reasons why you know it's so revered. I think the whether it be Shinto or Buddhism
Mm-hmm.
or various aspects of the culture is just so highly revered is because we know that it's something to aspire to be our higher self, to be a better person, to be kinder, more humble, show more respect. Um, it takes a pretty callous person not to understand that we could all be a little kinder, we could all be a little more honest, show more respect, show respect to everyone, not just
Mm-hmm.
your group or whatever. So,
Well, I
yeah.
agree with that, because imagine, John, if everybody adhered to the Code of Bushido, what would our world look like? And that's what I'm doing, is I share about the Code of Bushido, because after my motor vehicle accidents, I went to the women's prison and shared with the women there about, it was a life, I call it, just called a life skills class. And I teach about the Code of Bushido, and we talk about finance and everything. And occasionally I'd pose that question of what would happen if our world and people here would we have a prison? Would we have to have so many police? Would we have to have alarm systems? But no, people, not everybody here in this country is honest. So I try to have it go back to their lives, and how does this relate to you, and how are you going to be once you are released? We don't want you coming back. We want you to live a productive, happy life.
Hmm. Absolutely. And I think the recidivism, if they learn the lessons, the recidivism rate just goes is so
Down.
low, is so
Uh-huh.
down to almost nothing. Um, and then the only thing that really ends up being increasing it, and often, and not to say anything negative about this country necessarily, but it has so much to do about mental health and mental illness, and
Yes.
being able to deal with often repeat criminals are there. It's not that they're just so criminally driven and they're just evil people. It's like they often have mental conditions that kind of drive them that way, or have pushed them that way, or experienced trauma and been
Yes.
kind of forced in that direction. So
Mhm.
um, I think anything, I've actually worked with some organizations, some nonviolence organizations, some anti-trauma organizations, because I think that's one of the core principles of what I like to think about is a lot of people are very naive about why are they doing the sort of things that they do. Why are people acting like they do? When you sometimes you don't, if you don't have core principles or you've been exposed to trauma, um, then you're more likely. I remember Oprah talking about that famous line about hurt people hurt people,
Yes.
and that just is one of those. You know, say what you will about good old Oprah, but every once in a while she came. She had a way of taking pretty universal concepts but getting it out to millions, tens of millions,
Mhm.
hundreds of millions. So that's an example of that. And I don't know a lot about the criminal justice system in Japan, but it'd be interesting to compare and contrast with the U.S. Whatever. I think
It's much more
it's a far,
strict.
yeah, much more strict.
Yes.
Yes. So, but the amount, I don't think police don't carry guns. I don't think.
They
Maybe,
are,
maybe,
and it's so
yeah,
different there in Japan, you
right.
just can't imagine it. But uh, if you are convicted of a crime, it's pretty sure that over 90% sure that you are guilty.
Yeah.
It's like you don't mess around with that. And that's why they teach about Bushido, and to be to be helpful, kind, honest people, and that would really make the world go around better, much better, I think, and even in the schools, the young children are the janitors. So
Right.
they clean the
Exactly.
walls, and so they're not going to mar the walls or
Right.
make a mess. And
Right.
when you're in Japan, there aren't many garbage cans. So you take your own little bag and you put your garbage in there. And if you can find a place to dispose of it, great. But if you can't, then you just carry it with you, because you will not see many garbage cans. We're all responsible for our own garbage cans, because there's so many people in Japan, and like Tokyo has over 30 million alone.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, and I think, that should be the default. And then somehow, because we're a big country and we're spread out more, I don't know what necessarily, there's probably also anthropologists can come up with all sorts of reasons for why we act the way we do in this country, good and bad. I'm not going to just dump on it. I'm quite patriotic for this country. Um, um, but I think the default should be, be respectful. Again, it's the
Mhm.
Bushido way. Be respectful. That's across the board. It's to
Yes.
your environment, your family, your neighbors. It's across the board. And the fact that it's so ingrained early on in life is, I think, just so important. And it just makes sense. I love that story about having the kids take the coin to the police station and have that. I think back of, I'm really into international cinema, world cinema, and the opposite was the case in post-Victorian England. Alfred Hitchcock, one of my favorite directors,
Mhm.
was when he acted a little cross when he was 4 or 5 years old. His dad took him to jail and put him in jail just to traumatize him and to think that he was, that's what happens to bad little boys. And to
Whoa.
me, so he had a lifelong fear of police, and it was reflected in a lot of his films for that reason. So I think
Mm.
there's a big gap from having a child take a coin to the police and have show respect and bow and give it to the police and have a good relationship there, as opposed to the British way of scaring the dickens out of
Oh.
someone. That's one of those things that kind of resonate. We're kind of in between, probably here in the United States. We try not to traumatize our kids necessarily, and that was, late 18, early 1900s for Alfred. Um, but anyway, it's just that's a funny little aside that I couldn't help but think that's quite a contrast from embracing and being, enjoying meeting the police and doing all that.
Well, the difference between the Japanese society, I believe, in the United States is they are more of a group mentality, and they're even vacation, they do things together, and it's that little bit of peer pressure for everybody to conform, because this is the way it is. You don't steal, you don't do that. Versus, we're very free here in the United States. And my parents are the second generation Japanese American, and I saw some of that. There was most of them came over by themselves, and so all the relatives were their friends and people that they went to the camps with, and just there's little communities, because they had to kind of band together, because there was a lot of prejudice and a
Right.
lot of, yeah, so they really did practice that more. And I talk about that in Gaman, the the quiet resilience, and how they faced trials, not with rioting and that type of thing, but they did it with fear, not with fear, they did it with respect and patience. And so
Right.
that's what helped them get through World War II and the horrible atrocities that my parents went through, and my grandparents. But it made them strong, it made them more solid as a group. And
Hmm.
it really made a profound effect on me in my life. And some of our Japanese friends, we still call them cousins, because we were like cousins. We
That's
fought
interesting.
and did pranks on each other and did things like that. But I really do consider some of them my cousins, and we call each other cousin, and it's nice.
Well, it's interesting to me, especially, hearing it, when a group of, say, Tokyo having, 30 million people. I mean, if there isn't some sort of groupthink about getting along and helping each other and show respect for each other, what incredible chaos would be the potential. I mean, it's unimaginable, really.
Hmm.
And there's certain areas in the world that it's maybe doesn't have quite that big of a population, but it's more impoverished, or what I can think of a couple of countries that there is a little more chaos, and the distribution of wealth is immense, and there's more of a caste system, and all that. It can be very problematic. Um, so the fact that back to the Edo, some of the early dynasties, the fact
Hmm.
that these principles were set was was a philosophy, obviously, and I'm not a scholar on it at all by any means. I'm a participant observer, um, but the fact that it was the in the infinite wisdom of some of the early uh, leaders of the communities in the cities, back in the Edo period or even before, um, knew that we have to get along. There's just no way. It's us against the rest of the world, the marauding Chinese or whoever it ends up being. So it's interesting to me. As I get older, I find it more interesting. I wasn't as interested in history when I was younger, and now, of course, both my parents are gone, and our family history is of great interest to me. And it's like up to me to be the family historian now, which is
Yeah.
problematic.
Oh, that's funny. Um, what one thing I want to share is about that group mentality is so strong that I felt that pressure when growing up. My father used to say, you're Japanese American, and everybody's watching you. And if you do something bad, it's going to reflect not only on our family, but it'll reflect on our relatives, and then also the Japanese community at large, because they were under suspicion, faced racial prejudice that
Right.
horrendous, name calling and
Yeah.
everything that happened, especially during World War II. But they came
Yeah.
out and there was very successful generation of people. They rose above the
Abs-
situation. Hmm.
Absolutely. And that's something, this country goes through these waves of demonizing the other, and
Hmm.
it's very disconcerting. And we're going through it, a period of accelerated aspect of that right now. And I hope that is a short-lived trend. Um, that just even saying diversity, equity, inclusion, or even mentioning the word diversity now is kind of thought of as a bad word. Whereas you can go back to Darwin. Diversity is the most vital aspect of existence. you know, both sociologically or physiologically, you know, in every aspect. So the fact that you know, it's 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 disconcerting that this country has and I'm not going to get into politics, but this disconcerting that we have this pendulum swing. We seem to be getting a little towards the enlightenment side, and embracing our differences, and all of a sudden we swing back, and we all of a sudden, it seems like we're pointing at the other and thinking diversity is a bad thing. It's it's really one of the sadder things I think I've come across in my life. I've been around for a while, but um, I've lived in my community here, just north of Chicago, for 50 years, and when I think about it, I feel like, how have I become an elder in this community? It's like I feel like I used to think of someone that lived in this community at 50 years were like Civil War reenactors or something. To think that I have become an elder in my community is kind of an eye opener for me. So anyway, I got off on a little bit of a tangent there, but I think you're absolutely right, and certainly I feel like we're an inch away from kind of going through the camps, the internment camps in the 40s. that were such a terrible um, aspect of our history, or the American history. It's one of the most terrible. And not to bring it back to uh, Bushido and the aspect, everything I've read and seen, from Ken Burns documentaries and everything I've read, is that the internment camps were incredibly run and respectful. I'm not talking about the guards and stuff, although, but the people that had every reason to be upset and revolt and whatever, and they were kind of took it in stride and knew that
Uh-huh.
hopefully that this would be. I mean, talk about profound grace,
Yeah.
and in the most unimaginable bad situation, unethical, unjust,
They
unjust,
committed no crimes.
no crimes at all. And as a matter
Uh-huh.
of fact, the opposite. Many were like wanting to join the military to fight
They did
the Germans.
33,000. 33,000.
Exactly. But at the same time, there might be fighting Germans in the military. My dad was career Army, so I kind of have a soft spot about the military. But their family is in internment camps. It's just like our
How
history.
did how did
It's
they
a
do
check.
that?
The U.S. history is checkered. We have some great moments and some not so great moments. That's for sure.
But one great thing about this country is that President Reagan actually um, did a public apology and they were given reparation, those that were
Yes.
alive. So that doesn't happen in many countries. Yes, it was wrong, but they actually righted it wrong. And that's some of the Japanese people like Michi Weglin, who I wrote about in my book, opened the door for that reparation. They call it the Executive Order 9066. And it was her paving the way, saying that something was unjust. She was only a teenager, but then she spent a good part of her life writing that book and working towards righting a wrong. So that's a great thing. And Japanese people they just won't say yes or no. I mean, they won't say no. So if they are wrong, they just would say, well, they just, do you like this? Well, that's the
Right.
way
Right.
that's the way they disagree. Do you like that? Oh, well, they won't say yes or no. So it avoids conflict. And I just appreciate you being here so much. It just brings back a lot of memories about Japan and why I love Japan so much. And, speaking of Japan, I'm taking a group to Japan in May. And if anybody is interested, you're welcome to join me. There's still time to join. And I just want to tell, as we're about at the end of our half hour, actually almost hour. And I just want to thank you so much, John, for being here and sharing your experience. And do you have one final word for the audience?
Well, that's a good one. I I think I think anyone who hasn't been to Japan should either explore the history and aspect of all aspects of Japanese culture, and are if they're able to make a trip and go there, because it just the perspective. I think the perspective that I got from just 3 weeks in Japan was like a factor of 10 as far as resonating with me as a trip to Europe. I loved my trip to Europe. I loved Japan. I loved England. I love France. I love Germany, Italy. I'm a kind of an Italophile. I love Italy, um, but nothing has stuck with me. It's like,
Uh-huh.
and I think again, it's the people, it's the culture, it's the grace. I for some reason I keep thinking of the word grace, and I know maybe grace isn't even on the list of Bushido core principles, but for me, it all feels it fits into that whole aspect of it.
Well, that
Gracious,
that's
humble,
come
respect.
on. Hmm.
Yeah, it just to me that is so. I would just urge anybody, if someone can join you on your trip, I would encourage them to do it. um, I think there's great organizations and things here. I've gone to Buddhist shrines and temples and events here in the United States. We frequent multiple Japanese restaurants. We love them. um, so even as a vegan, it's not hard. Um, and again, it's one of the great things about Asian food and Japanese food specifically. Is like you tell them you're vegan, they're like they go out of their way to do something nice and interesting, and make some incredible miso something. It's
Mhm.
just been fantastic. So anyway, I didn't prepare a takeaway, but my takeaway would be to to jump in both feet first, or head first, or whatever the expression is, into the culture. And if a trip is possible, um, I would strongly recommend anyone does it. I was lucky to do it on a business trip, and I kept thinking I'd get back as a family trip, and we just, for whatever reason, haven't. Now my boys are grown, so now it'd even be trickier. But anyway, I would just impart to almost anyone that they would just have a phenomenal experience
Great.
traveling to Japan. So
Well,
thank you for having me. I really appreciate it, Lori.
thank
It was
you.
wonderful meeting you, and it's wonderful. Hopefully, I said something of interest, and it can be useful for your listeners. And I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Oh, great. Well, thank you so much. And we will put up your information if anybody wants to find out more about you, your website and the work that you do. So we will put that onto the podcast later. But
Wonderful.
it was thrilling. And also, did you know that Buddhists were, yes, the Buddhist priests were actually vegans?
Yes, I
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. Oh, you know that.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So
And
it's very
that can
easy.
be delicious food. I've had the
Oh,
Buddhist vegan food, and it's wonderful. It's really good.
absolutely.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
thank you
So
so much,
thank
John.
you,
It's been a
Lori. I
pleasure.
really appreciate it. Thank
And
you.
I believe that people will glean from this because it is a different way of life. And that's what that's what I have been sharing. That's been the intention, is about how to bring those Japanese and Bushido code into our lives, because they can be of value.
Great value. No
Yes.
question. There's no question about that.
Okay. Well, thank you
Thank
so
you,
much.
Lori.
Okay. And that's a wrap for today's episode, The Samurai Way. I hope you found a little inspiration, a new perspective, or just something to reflect upon as you go about your day. Now remember, the samurai spirit isn't just about history. It's about how you show up, face challenges, and live with purpose. Whether it's Ikigai guiding your path or a little extra Gambaru pushing you forward, keep walking strong. So if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, share, or leave a review. It really helps. And if you've got thoughts, questions, or just want to connect, just contact me. So until next time, stay focused, stay determined, and keep living with purpose. Mata ne.